When Europe first looked south, close your eyes for a moment. Imagine the world as it looked in the 15th century. Satellites, no global maps, no clear knowledge of what lay beyond the horizon. Europe was standing at the edge of the ocean and staring into mystery. For centuries, European merchants depended on ancient land, routes to reach the riches of the East, spices from India, silk from China, precious goods that traveled along the famous Silk Road, ending at the great city of Constantinople. But in 1453, something happened that changed the course of world history. Constantinople fell to the Ottoman Empire. With that single event, Europe suddenly lost easy access to the trade routes that connected them to Asia. The roads were no longer open. The prices of spices soared. Trade became uncertain. So European rulers began asking a dangerous question. If the roads are closed, can we reach Asia by the sea? And the first nation brave enough to attempt the answer was Portugal, the small kingdom that looked toward the ocean. Portugal was not the richest kingdom in Europe. It was small, with barely 1 million people. But it had one powerful advantage. It faced the Atlantic Ocean. Instead of turning inward like most European kingdoms, Portugal turned outward, toward the unknown waters of the Atlantic. At the center of this vision was a man known today as Prince Henry the Navigator. Henry gathered sailors, cartographers, mathematicians, and shipbuilders. Together they began developing better maps, better ships, and new navigation techniques that allowed sailors to travel farther than ever before. And then the voyages began. The first steps down the African coast. These early voyages were slow, careful, and full of fear. Sailors believed that beyond certain points of the ocean lay the sea of darkness, waters from which no ship could return. But little by little they pushed forward. 1435, Portuguese sailors passed Cape Bajador, once thought impossible to cross. 1445, explorers reached the Senegal River. By the mid-1400s, they were sailing along the coasts of Gambia, Cape Verde, and Sierra Leone. Each voyage revealed something new. New winds, new ocean currents, new coastlines, and new civilizations. What were they looking for? It is important to understand something here. These early voyages were not yet about conquering Africa. They were about trade, knowledge, and navigation. Portugal hoped to find gold and ivory from West Africa, direct access to Asian spices, new trade routes that avoided middlemen in North Africa and the Middle East, and perhaps even allies or Christian kingdoms further south. At the same time, these journeys expanded Europe's knowledge of the world. Maps became more accurate. Navigation improved. The outline of Africa slowly appeared on European charts. To sail beyond the known world was to confront uncertainty itself, to measure courage against the yawning void of the Atlantic, and to assert, implicitly, that the limits of human experience could be bent to the will of curiosity. Europe's gaze, pragmatic at first, was already shaping a philosophy of entitlement, belief that seeing could become knowing, and knowing could become dominion. Yet knowledge is never neutral. What began as charting currents, coastlines, and trade winds would, over decades and centuries, crystallize into systems of intervention, exploitation, and cultural imposition. The initial curiosity, the thrill of discovery, the intellectual audacity of navigation became entangled with commerce, ambition, and ultimately conquest. The act of looking south became an act of claiming, and history, as it often does, bore witness to both the light and the shadow within human endeavor. When we reflect on this era, we are compelled to see dualities, the brilliance of courage, the ingenuity of navigation, the meticulous care of maps, and the audacity of venturing into unknown waters, and alongside it, the shadow of the consequences a moment that would, in time, entangle millions of lives in cycles of extraction, displacement, and cultural disruption. Africa was not passive in this encounter. Its rivers, forests, coasts, and cities were active participants in shaping the European imagination, dictating what could be taken, traded, or understood. The continent was the axis upon which global history began to pivot its lands. Its peoples, its civilizations, silently imposing themselves upon the trajectory of Europe, even before Europe could fully grasp the scale of what it faced. The Atlantic was never merely water. It was a mirror, reflecting Europe's ambitions, its fears, its hubris, and reflecting, in equal measure, Africa's endurance, resilience, and the quiet, enduring power of its civilizations. Every mast that caught the wind, every sail that carried ships southward, was imbued with possibility and foreboding alike. The first voyages along Africa's coasts were more than journeys. They were the carriers of centuries to come centuries of exchange, encounter, and struggle. They were the beginning of a narrative in which the fates of continents would be intertwined, in which ambition and endurance would meet across the waves, and in which the very act of seeing would become inseparable from the act of shaping history. And in this reflection lies a profound lesson. The power of knowledge is inseparable from the responsibility it invokes. Curiosity is inseparable from consequence. To look outward, to chart the unknown, is to awaken possibility and, simultaneously, to awaken the shadow that always follows human action. History, in its deepest sense, is not a chain of events but a mirror of choices. Imagination and consequence sound here. In the Atlantic currents of the 15th century, we see both its grandeur and its burden.